She is the woman I have chosen.
The first thing Duke Nathaniel Blackwood asked of the 32 ladies hoping to become his wife was not whether they could sing, dance, manage an estate, or bear the weight of a noble name. He asked them to remove their gloves. For a moment, the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor fell into a silence so complete that the faint crackle of candles seemed louder than the orchestra. 32 young women stood beneath glittering chandeliers, each dressed in gowns chosen with extreme care by mothers, aunts, and ambitious family advisors. Some wore ivory silk to suggest purity. Others wore pale blue to flatter their eyes or rose pink to soften their features beneath the golden light. Diamonds flashed at their throats. Pearls gleamed at their wrists. Every smile had been rehearsed, every curtsy perfected, every answer prepared for the sort of questions a duke might ask when selecting the next Duchess of Blackwood. They had expected him to ask about accomplishments. Perhaps French. Perhaps music. Perhaps the management of servants, the education of children, or the duties of a woman expected to preside over one of the largest estates in England. Instead, Nathaniel Blackwood stood at the head of the room with his hands clasped behind his back and said calmly, "Remove your gloves." The request travelled through the ballroom like a dropped match through dry straw. Lady Beatrice Harlow laughed first, a delicate sound meant to invite others into the joke. But no one joined her. Lady Amelia Craven glanced toward her mother for guidance. A cluster of younger ladies exchanged horrified looks as though the Duke had asked them to surrender something far more intimate than white silk and lace. Nathaniel did not explain himself. He merely waited. At 36, he had long ago lost patience for performances. London called him difficult, cold, impossible to please. There were mothers who warned their daughters that the Duke of Blackwood had broken more hopes than promises, and that his fortune, though enormous, came with a temperament too severe for ordinary happiness. Yet those same mothers had still brought their daughters to his manor that evening because Blackwood was one of the oldest names in England, and a difficult duke was still a duke. One by one, the ladies obeyed. Gloves slipped from slender fingers and were folded carefully into laps. Soft hands appeared. Hands untouched by work, hands displayed with rings. Hands offered to the room as evidence of refinement. Nathaniel watched them all. He did not look at the most beautiful face. He did not linger on the richest gown. He watched the hands. Some ladies extended theirs with confidence, believing this strange test must have something to do with breeding or elegance. Others held them shyly, palms turned inward, afraid of being judged for bitten nails or a freckle exposed by candlelight. A few attempted to make the moment flirtatious, flexing delicate fingers as though they were being admired at a jeweller's counter. Then Nathaniel saw the one woman who had not moved. She stood near the back of the ballroom, half hidden behind the daughter of a viscount. Dressed in a modest gown of faded lavender that had clearly been altered more than once. She was not plain, but she had made herself difficult to notice. Her brown hair had been pinned simply. Her only ornament was a small silver locket at her throat. While every other lady attempted to become visible, she seemed to be quietly praying for invisibility. Miss Clara Whitmore. Nathaniel knew the name because he knew every name on the guest list. Daughter of a minor baron who had died leaving more debts than property. No fortune. No political advantage. No influence worth mentioning. Her invitation had been included at the request of an elderly countess who had once been close to Nathaniel's mother, and he suspected Clara herself had not wanted to come at all. That alone interested him more than the women who had fought for the invitation. "Miss Whitmore," he said. Every head turned, Clara froze. Her gloved hands moved instinctively behind her skirt. "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Beatrice tilted her head with theatrical sympathy. Perhaps Miss Whitmore did not hear the request. "I heard it." Her throat moved as she swallowed. Her fingers curled against the fabric of her gown. Something like fear passed across her expression, not the shallow embarrassment of a young lady worried over appearances, but a deeper fear shaped by memory. Then slowly she reached for the edge of her right glove. The silk caught briefly at her knuckles. She pulled it free. The first gasp came from the Viscount's daughter. The second from somewhere near the front. By the time Clara removed the left glove, the entire ballroom had seen. Her hands were scarred, not grotesquely. Not in a way that should have inspired horror. But London society had always been skilled at turning difference into spectacle. Thin pale lines crossed the backs of both hands. Several stretched over her knuckles. One finger on her left hand bent slightly at an angle that suggested an old break badly set. Near the base of her thumb, the skin bore the faint tightness of a burn healed long ago. The room responded exactly as Clara had expected it to. Women stared. Men looked away too late. Mothers whispered behind fans. Lady Beatrice released a soft laugh so polished it almost passed for pity. How unfortunate. Her face had gone pale and her shoulders had drawn inward, but she did not cry. She did not plead. She simply folded her scarred hands before her and endured the room's judgment with the exhausted dignity of someone who had survived it many times before. Nathaniel had seen enough. He crossed the ballroom. The ladies parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Clara looked up only when his shadow fell across her. "Miss Whitmore." "Your Grace. Would you walk with me?" "Walk with you?" Clara's gaze dropped to his offered hand. For one fragile second, Nathaniel saw the battle within her. She had been mocked too often to trust kindness easily. She knew the eyes of the room were on her. She knew that placing her damaged hand in his would invite fresh whispers, fresh speculation. Fresh humiliation if he withdrew even slightly. But he did not withdraw. At last, Clara placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold. His grip remained steady. Not tight. Not possessive. Simply certain. Nathaniel led her from the ballroom while 31 women watched in disbelief. No one spoke until the doors closed behind them. Then the room erupted. Lanterns glowed along the gravel paths, their light trembling across hedges and fountains. And the dark silhouettes of ancient trees. From inside Blackwood Manor, music resumed hesitantly, though the melody now sounded distant and strained. As if the orchestra itself had not recovered from the scandal. Nathaniel released Clara's hand once they reached the Rose Walk. She immediately folded both hands beneath her shawl. "You needn't hide them from me," he said. Clara's expression tightened. "With respect, Your Grace, people often say such things until they have looked long enough." And so did everyone else. Nathaniel studied her face beneath the lantern light. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 24, though weariness rested behind. Her eyes in a way youth should not have carried. Her beauty was not the kind that announced itself across a ballroom. It was quieter than that. The softness of her mouth. The steadiness of her gaze when she finally allowed herself to meet his eyes. The absence of calculation. "How did it happen?" he asked. Clara looked toward the dark garden. "An accident." "Do you consider me polite?" "No, Your Grace." Clara kept a careful distance at first, as though proximity itself might become a trap. Nathaniel allowed it. He had learned long ago that people revealed themselves more honestly when not pressed against a wall. Behind them, another burst of laughter rose from the ballroom. Clara lowered her chin. "I imagine your guests are disappointed." "Is there a difference?" Nathaniel found that he liked making her uncertain more than watching other women flatter him with confidence. After several more steps, Clara stopped near the fountain. "Your Grace, I should say something before this becomes worse than it already is. For me. You brought me out here in front of 31 women whose families possess far more influence than mine. I noticed. They will be offended. They were already tedious." Her eyes widened before she could. Nathaniel's mouth curved slightly. Clara looked away, but not before he saw the smallest hint of a smile. Then it vanished. "I am grateful for your courtesy," she said. "Truly. But if your intention was kindness, you have already done enough. And if my intention was curiosity, then I would advise against it." "Why?" "Because curiosity fades." There it was again. Not bitterness. Experience. Clara looked down at the gloves clutched in her hand. People want stories when they see scars. They want tragedy explained neatly, preferably in a way that allows them to feel generous for listening. But once the story becomes uncomfortable, they regret asking. The fountain water moved softly in the cold air. You speak as if you've been asked often. It's worse. He had uncovered something she had spent years trying to control. Regret touched him. He was not used to it. I did not mean to make you suffer. I know. Nathaniel looked at her scarred hands, still half hidden beneath the shawl, and felt an old memory stir. His father, in the hunting lodge years ago, holding a broken teacup and telling him that fine manners meant very little when hardship arrived. If you want to know who someone is, the old Duke had said, don't begin with their smile. Look at their hands. They will tell you what a person has touched, carried, protected, and endured. When they returned to the ballroom 20 minutes later, silence fell all over again. Clara attempted to withdraw toward the wall, but Nathaniel remained beside her. Lady Beatrice approached almost immediately, her smile bright and sharpened like a blade. Miss Whitmore, I do admire your courage. Lady Beatrice. Then perhaps Miss Whitmore possesses more courage than most women. I meant only that scars can be difficult. The rest of the evening ended earlier than planned. Families departed stiffly. Mothers whispered furiously into carriage shadows. Several ladies left in tears. Clara remained near the edge of the room with an expression so composed it almost convinced others she felt nothing. Nathaniel did not approach her again in public. But when she left, he watched from the upper gallery as she stepped into an old hired carriage alone. No footman accompanied her. No family shielded her from the cold. She wrapped the faded lavender cloak around herself, sat upright in the dim carriage, and looked. For all the world like a woman accustomed to leaving grand rooms without being asked to stay. Nathaniel stood there long after her carriage disappeared through the iron gates. Well, his aunt said from behind him, that was certainly a disaster. Was it? Find out everything you can about Miss Whitmore. Why? Because 31 women had offered him soft hands trained for display. And one woman had tried to hide hands marked by survival. I want to know what story everyone else was too shallow to ask properly. Clara Whitmore lived with her mother in a modest townhouse on the edge of Mayfair. Though calling it Mayfair was generous. Her father, Baron Whitmore, had gambled away most of the family income before dying suddenly of fever. What remained was barely enough to maintain appearances. Clara had no brothers. No dowry worth pursuing, no strong protector. No reason from society's perspective to be considered. Nathaniel read each line in silence. The reports said she rarely attended balls, never accepted extended house invitations. 3 days later, he saw her again. Not in a ballroom. Not surrounded by silk and judgment. But on a narrow road outside the poorest village on the edge of his estate. Nathaniel had followed at a distance, telling himself it was investigation rather than obsession. Rain had fallen that morning, leaving the lanes slick with mud, and Clara's plain cloak was damp around the hem. She walked without complaint, carrying a basket far too heavy for someone of her build. She entered a small cottage near the village square, then another, then a third. By afternoon, Nathaniel understood. Clara Whitmore was not disappearing from London to hide scandal. She was working. In the back room of a village infirmary that should have had 3 nurses and barely had one, Clara rolled up her sleeves and washed blood from a child's arm with careful hands. A little boy sat on the table, biting his lip, trying not to cry. Clara smiled gently as she wrapped the wound. You were very brave. Then looked down at her own hands. Perhaps a little. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, unseen. Then Clara crouched so she was eye level with the child. No. Scars mean your body worked very hard to heal. Then yours worked very hard. I suppose they did. By sunset, Clara had cooked broth for a widow, changed bandages for an elderly farmer, read aloud to 2 girls whose mother worked at the mill, and repaired the torn sleeve of a child too proud to admit he was cold. Her hands never rested. They lifted, cleaned, fed, mended, comforted. Those scarred hands that London had mocked beneath chandeliers had done more good in one afternoon than most aristocrats managed in a lifetime. Nathaniel remained outside the infirmary as evening settled over the village. Clara finally emerged, carrying the empty basket. She stopped when she saw him. For one long moment, neither spoke. Rain clung to the edges of her hair. Mud marked the hem of her gown. Her scarred hands were bare. This time she did not hide them. "Your Grace," she said quietly. Nathaniel looked from her hands to the infirmary behind her, then back at her face. "I believe," he said, "you owe me the truth about the accident." The village bell rang in the distance. And for the first time since he had met her, Nathaniel saw not embarrassment in her eyes but fear. Not fear of judgment. Fear of memory. "It wasn't an accident," she whispered. And beneath the dimming sky, Duke Nathaniel Blackwood finally understood that the scars Clara tried to hide were not the beginning of her story. They were the proof that something terrible had tried to end it. It wasn't an accident. Clara's gaze remained fixed somewhere beyond him, as though she were looking through the years rather than at the man standing before her. For several moments neither spoke. The evening bell echoed once more in the distance. Then Clara released a slow breath. "You followed me." "No. I investigated you." Her eyes drifted toward her scarred hands. The same hands she had spent years hiding beneath gloves. The same hands he had watched comfort children only hours earlier. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Clara remained silent long enough that he thought she might refuse. Instead, she turned toward a nearby stone bench overlooking the village square. "6 years ago," she said softly, "there was a fire. The orphanage. You know about it." For a moment she seemed unsure where to begin. Then the memories came. Slowly. Painfully. Like old wounds being reopened. Within minutes, flames consumed half the building. Most of the children escaped. Not all. Clara had been visiting that evening. She often volunteered there before her father's death destroyed what remained of their fortune. She remembered the smoke first. Then the screams. Then someone shouted that several children were still trapped upstairs. By the time firefighters arrived, the staircase had already collapsed. Everyone stood outside watching. Praying. Crying. Waiting. No one knew what to do. Then Clara ran inside. The first child she carried out was a little girl no older than 5. The second was unconscious. The third fought her the entire way because he was terrified. By then, her dress had caught fire. Someone tried to stop her from going back. She broke free and went back anyway. The 4th child survived. The 5th survived. The 6th nearly didn't. When she emerged carrying him through the flames, part of the ceiling collapsed. Burning wood struck her hands, her arms, her shoulder. The pain was so intense she remembered nothing afterward. Only darkness. Then weeks of recovery. Months of bandages. Years of scars. When she finished speaking, silence settled between them. Nathaniel stared at her. Not because he pitied her. Because he was trying very hard to imagine anyone he knew running into a burning building 6 times. Very few faces came to mind. None of them belonged to the women who had laughed at her in his ballroom. How many children survived? A group of village children ran across the square, chasing one another. One little girl waved at Clara. She waved back immediately. The child smiled and continued running. "You never told anyone." "Because it isn't important." "You nearly died." "The story was never supposed to be about me." Nathaniel had spent years surrounded by people desperate to be noticed, desperate for recognition. Meanwhile, the woman sitting beside him had risked her life for 6 children and spent the next 6 years trying to ensure nobody talked about it. Something shifted inside him. Something unexpected. Dangerous. Because admiration was one thing. This felt different. Lady Beatrice Harlow led most of them. According to her version of events, the Duke had become infatuated with a woman beneath his station. Some claimed Clara was manipulating him. Others insisted she had fabricated the story of the fire. A few suggested she was pursuing the title of Duchess through calculated pity. The whispers reached every drawing room in London. And eventually, they reached Clara. She accepted them with the same quiet resignation Nathaniel had come to hate. One afternoon, he found her in the gardens of Blackwood Manor after receiving yet another invitation she clearly had no desire to accept. "You knew this would happen." "Of course." "That is not an answer." "It is the answer." "Why do you always make excuses for people who hurt you?" For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. "I don't." Because they both knew he was right, Clara lowered her eyes. "Perhaps I am tired." Every invitation extended only to be withdrawn. Every room where people looked at her hands before her face. Years of it. No wonder she seemed exhausted. No wonder she expected kindness to disappear. The miracle was not that she sometimes lost hope. The miracle was that she had any left at all. Not in front of an audience. He found Clara sitting beneath an oak tree overlooking the lake and simply told her the truth. "I would like you to become my wife." A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Clara stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "What?" "I wish to marry you." "No." He had not anticipated immediate rejection. For the first time in years, Duke Nathaniel Blackwood found himself speechless. Clara stood. "I can't." "Gratitude." "Clara. One day you'll wake up and realize there were easier choices." "A duchess." "And what exactly do you think a duchess is?" Because the truth was she had spent years believing she wasn't enough. Not beautiful enough. Not wealthy enough. Not important enough. The scars had become proof of every insecurity she carried. Nathaniel saw it clearly now. The greatest wound the fire had left behind wasn't on her skin. It was in her heart. Lady Beatrice hosted one of the largest social gatherings of the season. Nearly every influential family in London attended. Clara almost declined. Nathaniel insisted. Halfway through the evening, disaster struck. Or perhaps inevitability. Lady Beatrice approached Clara before an audience large enough to guarantee humiliation. "My dear Miss Whitmore." Clara already knew where this was going. Lady Beatrice smiled sweetly. "Tell me. Have you finally found gloves strong enough to hide them?" Clara felt the familiar shame begin rising inside her. Years of practice helped her keep her expression composed. But the pain remained. Lady Beatrice stepped closer, then reached out. And deliberately took hold of Clara's wrist. Before Clara could react, Beatrice pulled one glove halfway free. Gasps spread across the ballroom. There they were again. The scars. Displayed like a spectacle. Like entertainment. Like proof of inferiority. For one terrible moment, Clara felt 24 years old and helpless all over again. Then another hand appeared. A larger hand. A stronger hand. Nathaniel. He gently removed Clara's wrist from Beatrice's grasp. The Duke's expression was terrifyingly calm. The ballroom fell silent. "Your Grace." Nathaniel turned toward the assembled guests. Then slowly reached for Clara's uncovered hand. Every person in the room watched. He lifted her hand openly, proudly, without hesitation. Without. "I have spent most of my life surrounded by perfection." Nathaniel's gaze swept across the crowd. Hands that have never known hardship. Hands that have never sacrificed anything. But these. Saved 6 children from a burning building. Shock spread from face to face. Lady Beatrice looked as though she might faint. Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "I have never seen hands more worthy of respect." For the first time in years. Clara did not try to hide. The silence between them felt different now. Lighter. Softer. "I frightened half of London tonight." Only half. The sound caught both of them by surprise. Then Clara looked down at her hands. For the first time, they were uncovered. No gloves. No hiding. No shame. "Do you really mean it?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel stepped closer. "Mean what?" "Clara." The same hands she had spent years trying to conceal. They are proof that you ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. They are proof that 6 children lived. They are proof of courage. And if you still cannot see what I see, then I will spend the rest of my life reminding you. The moonlight shimmered across the gardens. And for the first time since the fire, Clara Whitmore believed she might finally stop hiding.